Hello everyone. Today I want to respond to it was recent and then this video took forever, but a semi-recent devotional done by a leader of the LDS Church. Grab a drink and let's begin. This time I just have a transcript I will read from. I'll link to the transcript so you can make sure I'm honest about my representation, as I will be skipping around a bit and cutting out a lot of the more preachy parts. For those of you that don't know, Russel M. Nelson did a devotional at BYU, speaking to students of the religious institution, and there were so many of them there. Just look at how packed the building is, and the line that formed. And note that the people he is speaking to are impressionable young adults who revere this man. Quick side note, the name Russell makes me think of the adorable boy in Up, but rather than the cheery and innocent partner of Mr. Fredricksen, we get a goblin from Harry Potter. So enjoy that mental image from now on. Before we go into it, I'm going to spoil things a bit. Nelson talks about the church's stance on the LGBT community here, and it's not very pretty. But he waits quite a while to actually get into it. Most of the speech is to try and set it all up so that the hate and bigotry he spits out sounds slightly reasonable to those that aren't part of the community or have anyone in the community. Knowing that that is the goal here, let's move forward. Nelson discusses 5 truths that he wants to share. The first is that everyone are sons and daughters of God's. He says, "You are the children whom God chose to be part of his battalion during this great climax in the long-standing battle between good and evil, between truth and error. I would not be surprised if, when the veil is lifted in the next life, we learn that you actually pled with our Heavenly Father to be reserved for now. I would not be surprised to learn that premortally you loved the Lord so much that you promised to defend his name and gospel during this world's tumultuous winding up scenes." Right here, Nelson brings up a great climax between good and evil, truth and error. I found this rather strange. I mean, it's not like we're in the tail end of a massive world war. I couldn't think of what could qualify the current times as a climax or a struggle between good and evil. But it's the last part of that phrase that made it click in my mind. A battle between truth and error. So we already know that whatever he will be talking about, he thinks that everyone that doesn't share his viewpoint is an error. And not even just that, it is a great climax between good and truth versus evil and error. And then he butters up the crowd, saying how they are champions of his word and gospel. Oh boy, here we go. Truth number 2. Truth is truth. Some things are simply true. The arbiter of truth is God, not your favorite social media newsfeed, not Google, and certainly not those who are disaffected from the church. Right here, he's building an us versus them narrative. But my favorite part is that he specifically includes those that are disaffected from the church in the group that clearly can't know the truth. He's saying, those people that don't like me, they have to be wrong. Why? Well, they don't like me. Many now claim that truth is relative and that there is no such thing as divine law or a divine plan. Such a claim is simply not true. There's a difference between right and wrong. Truth is based upon the laws God has established for the dependability, protection, and nurturing of his children. Eternal laws operate in and affect each of our lives, whether we believe them or not. Knowing that he's going to talk about LGBT rights here, the relative truth he is talking about would be that LGBT people have just as much of a right to their relationships as anyone else. He wants to stop that type of thought here by saying it's only a relative truth and obviously can't compare to divine law, which of course he has a huge part in deciding what that is. He isn't even trying to minimize opinions about ethics here. He is saying that those that say they have an opinion on ethics can't actually have an opinion. I want to break in here and briefly go over the Mormon Church's history with LGBT community. First of all, they used to use conversion therapy, which is practically torture for those that don't know. They only changed their mind about it in 2016. That's insanity. It was November 2015 when a controversial policy took place, and people got angry, understandably so. Before the policy, the place of the LGBTQ community in the church was a little bit of a gray area. The policy made it clear. You could not be actively Mormon and be gay. The children of same-sex couples could not get a baby blessing, be baptized, or get the priesthood. The only way for a child of a same-sex couple to get any of these things was when they turned 18, they would have to move out, disavow same-sex relationships and their parents, and receive permission from the top leadership of the church, the First Presidency. This is more than just a statement about children of LGBTQ parents. It was a statement to all members of the community. You will be dooming both yourself and your future or current family in the eyes of God. They even made it so that a same-sex relationship made you an apostate and opened the door for excommunication. In the time where LGBTQ rights were finally coming to new places and people, the church felt like it had regressed. Later that week, at least 1,000 people showed up in a mass resignation from the church. One thing I want to point out is that up until then, it was the decision of the bishops. You were essentially playing bishop roulette, but there were some wards where members of the LGBTQ were welcomed. But after the Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage across the country, the church felt like it needed to make a definitive statement. According to Dr. Todd Christofferson, who is a very high-ranking member of the church. I'll put a video link so you can see him describe it yourself. In April 2019, the church revised things again. We all know that there is no way that God could have foreseen the PR nightmare that the original policy caused. The update made it so that being in a same-sex relationship was no longer apostasy. Instead, it was just a serious transgression on par with heterosexuality violations, like having sex outside of marriage. But they were still not treated the same, as even if you were married to your partner, you could not engage in any sexual acts, while a heterosexual couple can have all the sex they want if they're married. Also on this same token, it was now okay for children of same-sex couples to be baptized and get baby blessings. With that history in mind, let's hear how all these policies are so based from love. Truth number 3. God loves every one of us with perfect love. There is a strong connection between God's love and his laws. I have come to see the significance of that connection and the power of divine law. 2 experiences may illustrate. The first I see as a parent. As our children were growing up, their mother and I established family rules to keep them safe and facilitate their growth. Our children did not always like or understand the rules, but because we loved them, we were willing to do all we could to guide and protect them. Just as the rules that my wife and I developed for our children were motivated by love, God's laws reflect his perfect love for each of us. His laws keep us spiritually safe and help us to progress eternally. Here he gives an example of parents giving out rules for his kids. Fine. But what he is also saying is that you need to obey God regardless of what you think about it, because God has this perfect plan that we just can't understand. But based on the policy change, it seems like God doesn't have a firm grasp on his plan either. I think it's just fine to discount an idea from a parent if it just keeps flip-flopping. How do you know what you're hearing now is the correct plan? Just as the rules that my wife and I developed for our children were motivated by love, God's laws reflect his perfect love for each of us. His laws keep us spiritually safe and help us to progress eternally. I'm jumping the gun again, but supposedly God created every one of us. And we also know that sexual orientation is not a choice. So God gave these people their sexual orientation, but then condemns them for acting out on that attraction that he himself gave them? What a jerk. The second experience by which I came to see the power of divine law came during my career as a medical doctor and scientific researcher. Oh boy, here we go. Come on, let's not pretend that you are using scientific reasoning for your conclusions about God. I'm going to paraphrase a bit here as it's just too much to read out loud. Basically, Nelson says that he worked on the artificial heart and that at one time they had no idea how the heart really worked. But then one day, 2 truths articulated in the Doctrine and Covenants spoke to my inquiring mind. These truths were, first, that all blessings were predicated upon obedience to law, and second, that to every kingdom there is a law given. Well, I reasoned that if every kingdom had a law, there must be laws that govern the beating heart. I was determined to discover those laws and obey them. By doing so, blessings would come and lives could be saved. What? Wait, what? First of all, I don't know what blessings have to do here. It's not a blessing that we have hearts that work, and it's not a blessing that after countless hours of countless researchers working, we figured out how a normal human heart works. Not to mention, it's not like there's a single set of hard and fast rules to how every heart works. Other animals have a heart that is structured differently and therefore works differently. And don't even get me started on heart defects. But I refuse, because of a simple reason. This whole section is not to teach people how the heart works. It is to conflate what he calls divine law with physical laws of nature. He actually goes on and further explains the workings of the heart, but I don't care. He could be a great surgeon, but that doesn't mean that what he says about what God says about ethics is correct. Divine law is incontrovertible. The same can be said of the law of gravity and the laws of lift that allow planes to fly. Each is an absolute truth. Doctors or pilots do not have the power to change those laws, but their understanding of them safeguards lives. No, just no. Natural laws of the universe do not include claims about ethics. He has taken almost a quarter of his whole speech to conflate physical laws of the universe to divine law. Also, Nelson, you are not a doctor or pilot understanding a law. You actively change how the church deals with different aspects of life. Don't give me that. The prophet Joseph Smith taught that God instituted laws whereby we could have a privilege to advance like himself. God's greatest blessings are reserved for those who obey his laws, as he explained. For all who will have a blessing at my hands shall abide the law, which was appointed for that blessing. God's laws are motivated entirely by his infinite love for us and his desire for us to become all we can become. In the context that he knows he's going to present something that won't easily be accepted, something revolving around ethics and not natural laws of the universe, this is almost a threat. It's like a mob boss showing up. That's a nice heaven you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. But don't worry, as long as you do exactly what I say, you won't have to worry about it. That doesn't sound loving, no matter how much you just state that it is. Truth number 4. The Lord Jesus Christ, whose church this is, appoints prophets and apostles to communicate his love and teach his laws. In essence, you better listen to me. Look, for another incorrect reason, you need to listen to me and me only. Each of the Lord's apostles is in a position to observe and feel the love that Heavenly Father has for his children, particularly for those who are struggling. He cares deeply about those who have strayed from the covenant path, especially when they fear there's no way back. Once again, keep in mind that he is going to bash on LGBTQ kids here. This is him trying to reassure people that it's motivated by love. He sees the struggling people clearly, but still is a bigot and still preaches hate. But if you aren't part of that minority, maybe this could make all that hate just slip past you. He goes on for a little, saying you're never too far gone in the eyes of God, says that prophets are rarely popular, which is just plain wrong. Remember that massive line and huge building filled with people that are coming just to see him? You can't look at that and tell me prophets aren't popular. They're hugely popular. He goes on to say that apostles and prophets can only speak the truth. Sure, Jan. And then finally, he gets to what he has been building up to this entire time. And of course, I'm going to jump in for just a moment, though. Remember, he has been poisoning the well this whole time, saying this time is a great conflict between good and evil, truth and error, buttering up the crowd by saying how special they are, conflating natural laws with opinions on ethics, trying to tell you that people who don't like him cannot have any type of the truth, and saying it about 5 different ways that of course he's the only one who can speak the truth. Good review? Okay, let's move on. For example, let's consider the definition of marriage. In recent years, many countries, including the United States, have legalized same-sex marriage. As members of the church, we respect the laws of the land and abide by them, including civil marriage. The truth is, however, that in the beginning, marriage was ordained by God, and to this day it is defined by him as being between a man and a woman. God has not changed his definition of marriage. First of all, how this is written makes it seem like this is an almost innocent example. Like Nelson could be talking about almost anything and just happened upon the topic of non-heterosexual marriage. That is not the case. This whole speech has been a build-up to this topic, LGBTQ rights and their part in the church. Even though Nelson says here that they won't fight the laws of the land, he is saying that God doesn't agree, and is basically saying the church won't accept any other type of marriage than between a man and a woman, because bigots got a bigot. God has also not changed his law of chastity. Requirements to enter the temple have not changed, and our desire for there to be love at home and harmony between parent and child has not changed. This shouldn't be very surprising, but I want to bring something else up. Sex before marriage can be a wonderful thing for a couple of reasons. It is good for you to know if you are sexually compatible with your partner before you are essentially stuck together. Of course, divorce is a thing, but wouldn't it be better to find out before you get married? It's good to know that the libidos of you and your partner are compatible. They don't have to be the same, but at least knowing that there can be a compromise that works for the two of you is good. Or maybe you or your partner is asexual. That is incredibly good to know before marriage. On the topic of harmony between parent and child, I cry foul. Think back to the policy changes the church made in 2015. Having to move out and completely disavow their parents' activities is anything but striving for harmony between parent and child. You can't say you strive for harmony but advocate for something that is in direct conflict with that. But unholy roast, that policy only lasted for 3 years. I don't care. There are families who are completely broken by that policy from 3 years ago. And I guarantee you that the leader of the church now saying he values harmony between parent and child doesn't mend those broken relationships. Though we of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles cannot change the laws of God, we do have the charge to build up the church and regulate all the affairs of the same in all nations. Thus, we can adjust policy when the Lord directs us to do so. And isn't it so convenient that your God lets you adjust policy when that same policy gives you incredibly bad PR? Perhaps I can illustrate this through policy adjustments regarding those who identify themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender and their children. Consider the policy announced in November 2015 related to the advisability of baptism for the children of LGBTQ parents. Our concern then, and one we discussed at length and prayed about fervently for over a long period of time, was to find a way to reduce friction between gay or lesbian parents and their children. Because parents are the primary exemplars for their children, we did not want to put young children in the position of having to choose between beliefs and behavior they learned at home and what they were taught at the church. We wanted to facilitate harmony in the home and avoid pitting children and parents against each other. Thus, in 2015, the policy was made to assist children and their parents in this circumstance, namely that children being raised by LGBT parents would not automatically be eligible for baptism at age 8. I want to remind you all again here that Nelson spent the majority of his speech trying to set himself as the authority, or at least a mouthpiece of the authority, and trying to discredit in every way those that disagree with him. He doesn't have to directly say that divine laws against those in the LGBTQ community, even though that's very well known. I live in Utah, where the culture created by this church is rampant. The church here runs on cycles of shame. The policy in 2015 didn't just bar kids of LGBTQ parents from getting baptized, it made homosexual activity, even in marriage, apostasy. That is to say, it was one of the biggest no-nos the church has to offer. Not only did this estrange a lot of older LGBTQ parents and their families from the church, it was a warning. I can't imagine being a gay teen in Utah before the policy. Afterward, they knew that they would be completely rejected by the church that they were raised to believe is completely true in every way. They were taught that a part of them was broken and was not to be accepted. And not only that, but if they were to live true to themselves and find a partner of the same sex, they would also be dooming their children to the same discrimination regardless of if they themselves were homosexual. Utah has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the country. It is bad enough that the leading cause of death for teens in Utah is suicide. And I'm very well aware that suicide is a messy, complicated issue. And I'm not saying that this policy was the sole reason for suicides in Utah, but it would also be just as fallacious to say that it didn't have a massive impact. With that in mind, yet again, no, I don't buy this idea that the whole point was to reduce friction between parents and children. This church historically has not only supported but carried out conversion therapy. They despise homosexuality and really everything that is not heterosexuality. This is a church that has a central message toward revolving around family, but not any family, only their specific definition of family. Make no mistake, their policy was to break up the families that they do not support. The First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 have continued to seek the Lord's guidance and to plead with him in behalf of his children who were affected by the 2015 policy. We knew that this policy created concern and confusion for some and heartache for others. That grieved us. Whenever the sons and daughters of God weep, for whatever reasons, we weep. So our supplications to the Lord continued. No, you cannot speak of the pain and suffering that you caused and act like that was the motivating factor for change. The incredible amount of horrible PR and the mass withdrawals from the church were the factor, and both you and I know it, Nelson. And once again, I'm going to bring up the rest of this speech, where you conflated divine law and physical laws of the universe. Why would you try to change something that this God of yours established, especially when divine law is supposed to be just as strong as, per your example, how the human heart functions? How about you continue to supplicate to this God to get him to stop all heart attacks and heart defects? No? Wonder why? We also took note of LGBTQ parents who sought permission from the First Presidency for their children to be baptized. In nearly every case where the LGBTQ parents agreed to teach their children about and to be supportive of the covenant of baptism, the requested exception was granted. I'm sorry, I simply don't care how many LGBTQ kids that were baptized despite the policy by begging these hateful old men to make an exception. You should feel ashamed for introducing this in the first place. That's it. I'm too angry and too tired. He goes on to repeat the reversal of the policy later, as if the damage hasn't been done, and the implication doesn't still carry the same weight as it did before. He repeats again how everything they do is out of love. Tell that to the thousands of families who lost sons, daughters, and parents when they disavowed their family. Tell that to the thousands of families who lost sons, daughters, and parents when they killed themselves. This is too little, too late. You, Russell Nelson, and other leaders of the church, you played with fire, and it burned you and everyone else. One suicide is too much. The actions you have taken much, much more than a single life. Your hate and bigotry has massive impacts to those that listen. People and institutions like you are why I made this channel. People need to hear someone fighting back against your garbage. Yes, I am disaffected with the church. I'm the exact type of person Nelson warned you about. The difference between me and him is that I actually care about people, and I actually care about truth. That's it. This has been The Unholy Roast, and thank you for listening to my still small voice.